Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I appreciate having some folks to talk to about this. It's been quite an interesting project. We're just ending the wrap-up of 3 years of running the BRE pilot, the Business Retention Expansion pilot. Most of my presentation today is going to be focused around delivering to you the results from that. I'd like to give you one note on the percentages that I'm going to be delivering on the way through this presentation. I'll be telling you some of the percentages and sometimes the number of businesses that have been responding in a certain manner. And you might note at certain times that the percentages may or may not add up to 100%. On some questions, people were able to give multiple responses. So we may have them add up to more than 100% in those cases. And furthermore, not every community asked every single one of the questions that we've got. We've got the standard BRE questionnaire, but the RDI also put together several additional questions to be tacked on to the end. And so there's been various response rates, both through the interviewers themselves, the community's decisions, which chunks of the questionnaire they were going to apply to their respondents, and then of course respondents were free to not respond to certain questions. So if we've just finished doing a wrap-up report on this, and I believe that that's going to be released fairly shortly through the RDI website, which is on the final slide that I'm going to leave up. And once we have that up and published on the website, you'll see on the way through that report that we've indicated how many respondents there were to each of the different questions. So, introduction to the BRE pilot. We're wrapping up a 3-year pilot program in which we had 15 communities participate. The CBT Community Development Program provided financial support, about $10,000 per community. And for those who are considering a BRE project now or in the future, you should chat with your community liaison about accessing that support. And the RDI has provided and will continue to provide technical support, training support, and data processing and analysis. And our participation in this and provision of that support allows us to provide this level of regional analysis overall afterwards. So, without further ado, I'm going to jump into this here. So you know who it was that responding. Here's a breakdown of the different industry classifications of those that participated in the survey. This is fairly consistent with small town economies with somewhat limited economic basis, mostly retail with some limited development of industry in different centers. And I'm going to be going through this fairly quickly. In terms of the life cycle, encouraging to see roughly 60% on the growth or emerging industries phase of the life cycle. Of course, a little bit of a concern to have a third in the maturing and 5% in the declining phase of their industrial cycle. This could be a reflection of the prevalence of resource extraction and processing in the area, but may also include some of the retail folks feeling like the town in which they're operating is stable or perhaps even in decline. We've got to do a bit more research into the details on this. Again, one of the nice things to see is a nice stable trend with so many of our businesses having been operating for over 10 years. Business plans. It's encouraging to see over half of our businesses with business plans in place. This is actually quite impressive. Still like to see an increase in the number of business plans. It elevates the level of sophistication in terms of business administration. Only 17% with current succession plans. On the surface, this might be a concern, but it's pretty good when we look at the ratio of those actually planning changes in ownership. It would still be nice to see people thinking a little bit further forward, but the realities of the day-to-day business are that tends to be off in the future for a lot of businesses. Looking at the number of employees, this tells us a little bit about the size of the businesses that we're looking at. Over 70% of our businesses have fewer than 10 employees. This is consistent with what we would all expect in this area where we're predominantly looking at small business. In terms of staffing over the next 3 years, this is quite promising to see 42% of our businesses expecting increases in the full-time workforce. Now, where are they looking from? We got almost 90% of our employees within the local market. This, I'm sure, is not much of a surprise, but one thing I'd like to think about around this when we start looking in the next couple slides about recruiting needs and the levels of skills. With 89% of our workforce drawn from the local population, this might indicate to us that there's a good opportunity, or perhaps even an important opportunity, to further develop the local skill sets and the workforce sophistication. Also may indicate to us that we've got a good opportunity to widen our skill sets by recruiting from outside the region. Now, in terms of those recruitment needs, we've got a lot of our recruitment needs coming through the service industry, particularly through tourism. Some of the anecdotal stories that we've been hearing from the tourist industry and from the retail industry have revolved around the desire to see improved professionalism and a heightened level of service within those service industries. Again, consistent with what we hear on the anecdotal stories, is that we have a need for trades, particularly mechanics, machinists, and heavy machine operators. Now, one of the encouraging things in terms of economic diversity is the growing desire to see professional and technical staff. This is encouraging and indicates a movement towards industrial growth and expansion. Now, when we look at the skill levels, you see the majority are looking for skilled employees. Over half of their workforce is at the higher level of the skill spectrum. Now, this is slightly troubling when we think about the labor force survey results. Unfortunately, I don't have them here in the slides for you, but the Kootenay Development Region is close to 10% below the national average in terms of post-secondary level of attainment. So we've got a growing level of recruitment needs, particularly in the high skill area, but we've got a low rate of post-secondary education. Now, our training needs that people are looking for principally focused on fulfilling those recruitment needs. The other thing I'd like to draw your attention to here are the responses supporting the needs for business management and emerging practices. This speaks again to a hunger of our business owners to increase their level of sophistication, which would be a great help to them in terms of growing their sectors and possibly expanding the economic base. Looking at our sales, this is generally in line with what we see from the employee numbers as an indicator of firm size. Most of our businesses are sitting in the under 500,000 per year sales level in that smaller size of businesses. Interesting, and I have not yet figured out what the bimodal spike is. We see this, our biggest chunk of businesses are sitting between 100,000 and 500,000, that small business size, and then a little dip between 500 and a million, and then this fairly significant spike between 1 million and 5 million in sales. So some things to look at and to do a little bit more learning about. Now, in terms of market growth, again, in line with where people are assessing themselves in terms of their life cycles of the industries, we're seeing over half of the people feeling that their market is in the growing, and over a third feeling that they're stable, and only 9% decreasing. If you recall back, we had about 8% feeling that their industry overall was in a decline. So this supports that finding. Now, here's the part where I would like to spend just a little bit more time looking at the source of sales and source of supplies. In my opinion, this is one of the most important chunks that we're going to see come out of the BRE. We see a very local focus in terms of the source of sales. Now, this supports one of the general understandings, frustrations in the region, where we see high transportation costs and this resource economy driving so much of what happens within our economy. We don't export a lot from this region, and what we do export tends to be raw materials. Now, look at this in conjunction with the following slide. The source of our supplies, only 29% buying principally from the local market. This, combined with the previous slide, looking at where our sales are coming from, tells us that we've got some pretty significant breaks in the supply chain. We produce raw materials, sell those, and buy back high value-added items into this region. This is an area where we could do a lot of work and spend some time and some focus. Now, why is it that people are not buying local supplies? Well, they're not available or they're too high a cost. Again, this should resonate with people because we're a low population, low volume area. Serving only local customers makes it difficult for people to get a high enough volume to get their costs driven down to be competitive. So we see that a lot of potential supplies are just not produced or are produced at too high a cost for this area. So, looking at general levels of facility conditions, people feel that their facilities are in good shape. Looking at ownership and expansion plans, we see 61% of facilities are owned by the business owner. Now, as a side note, I'd like to spend a bit more of my time looking at this, but on the surface, to me, this seems like a lot of businesses tying up potential growth capital in land and building ownership. Again, I want to spend a bit more time thinking about that. 49% planning to expand within 3 years. This is a very encouraging figure. We look at how and where. Well, with these facilities that people feel are in good form and sufficient for their needs, over half of these businesses say that they have room for expansion at their site, and 2/3 saying that that site is adequate for the level of expansion that they're planning. Again, with our local focus, we see that 86% of these investments are planned for the local area. We've got a breakdown here in the slide of the size of these investments. I did a little back-of-the-envelope estimation, so this is very rough and crude estimate, but this represents roughly $420 million worth of investments that are planned for the local economies. This is a lot of potential waiting to be unleashed in our local economies. Things that might be preventing those from occurring: access to finance, lack of skilled people, and lack of suitable premises. In terms of growth functions, we typically look at the interaction between technology, land, labor, and capital. And we've got pressures in each of those categories of growth. So I'm going to take a look at how people feel they are being supported within the region. In terms of, and government services was a fairly crude heading for all of these. They could be termed infrastructure generally. Some of them are provided by government, some through private industry, but generally it's infrastructure and support networks in the area. So what we see in terms of those services being rated as poor, this conforms with a lot of the common complaints that we hear about the Castlegar Airport and broadband communication. This shouldn't be a big surprise for a lot of people. Again, we've got this question around availability of buildings for lease or purchase. We get some fairly conflicting results around this question of employment lands, and we've done a little bit of preliminary research on employment lands. There's a report that the RDI has issued, but we've got more questions coming on that, so we may want to talk a bit more about that later. Those things that were rated fair: supplier access and access to markets. These things speak to this isolation, the geographic isolation, and that limited ability to provide supplies for our local economy that we spoke of in those earlier slides. The things that we see rated as good or excellent are really related into our infrastructure that's provided by the government. Highways and roads, water, sewage, recycling, access to markets. That's a bit of a surprise to me, but we've got very good rating of our general infrastructure. Airports are a constant source of pressure. No surprises here. We see that Kelowna is the most frequently used airport. Now, people would also like to see better reliability in commuter flights coming out of the Castlegar Airport. In terms of our business climate, I was a little disappointed to see the low rating of the local business climate. We've got some good stuff, over 40% as good or excellent, but at least equal or even more people viewing it as fair to poor. But the level of optimism is there for the future, with 2/3 feeling like it's going to be better in the future. And that is very encouraging. And you'll see some of that optimism through some of the next few slides. Looking at business climate factors, those that were called out at poor, technical training and workforce skill sets. These again are related back into the role that labor plays in growth and productivity. Not surprising that we see economic development rated as poor, with so many of our 28 communities in the Basin Boundary region having a limited budget, with limited to no budget for an economic development officer. We look at those that are rated fair. We see housing is a notable pressure, and this is one that, although I don't have any slides on it, shows up as one of the strongest pressures on the local workforce. Employers want to be able to provide their employees with an environment that supports them from all angles, and housing in the area is a challenge for many. Those that are receiving good ratings. Our educational institutions and the education system, the formal education system, is rated very good, and our lifestyle. Right? This is an important one when we talk about the notion of amenity migrants, those people who may move to our area and bring new skill sets. This is a good attractant for those folks. In terms of our excellent ratings, again, our education and some aspects of our workforce quality are related very well. So we've got some people thinking about our business climate factors in the region, and some good stuff. Looking at barriers to growth, these are heavily weighted to issues related around the physical isolation and low population density. Our demographics and economic diversity, again, these are recurring things that keep on coming up through the results of the BRE. Looking at our competitiveness factors, people saying things that are not at all important to their competitiveness. Exports, airport, and access to capital. These had me scratching my head for a moment until I realized that the unimportance of international markets for local retailers or for people who are in a mindset and self-image of their business that is very local, this is not that surprising. Sometimes this is quite realistic for a lot of the smaller businesses in the smaller communities, but as a general trend, it's not helpful for an overall growth mentality. Again, for some of the communities that are far away from the airports, the airport might not seem all that important. In terms of access to capital, again, this speaks to a lack of growth mentality, perhaps. Now, I'm very encouraged by the low number of businesses that you see that are reporting that these are not at all important. In terms of those that are not very important, again, we see similar trends to those that are not at all important, and again, speak to isolated, low growth mentality. The expanding the workforce has me scratching my head still. Those factors that were deemed somewhat important. Increasing the market, looking at strategic alliances and expanding the workforce. We see a lot more businesses saying that these are somewhat important, and this is encouraging because particularly the strategic alliances and the workforce are critical to innovation and improving growth. So those factors that were determined to be very important. Looking at telecommunications, our broadband is a big infrastructure gap. Our other two factors here, customer service and workforce development, speak again to the quality of our labor pool, and as that relates back into our overall production and productivity. And speaking of productivity, looking at the drivers that have been rated poor, networking and collaboration not being done very well. measuring impact of productivity efforts and investments, investing in people and skills. These are three things that are very important for productivity and for growth. So again, I'm encouraged that there's not very many businesses saying that these are poor, but those that are again, reflection of perhaps isolated population and a lower level of sophistication of the management. Those that received fair ratings, again, very similar to the previous one. Again, a concern that people think that these are not, or that people are rating them as not that great. Measuring productivity, networks and collaboration, and innovation, all of which are very important for growth overall. Those receiving good ratings. Productive workplace culture, that's wonderful to see that. Leadership and management capacity is rated well. And organizing work and structures. These are good seeds for growth, and I'm encouraged to see the number of businesses that are rating these high. Again, with the excellent ratings, we've got those same seeds for growth, and again, very encouraging to see the numbers on these that are being related as high. Looking at those businesses doing self-assessment of their plans. Businesses are feeling good about their performance. This is encouraging and supports in with that general level of optimism. In terms of management attitude towards the community, we see that these business owners feel like they've got a good relationship with the local community. This is very important. Perhaps it's a reflection of the commitment to the area and the love of the lifestyle. Very, very, very important for a very localized economy. In terms of facilities and any danger to downsizing or closure overall, we've got a very low risk of closure or downsizing. And again, this is very encouraging and likely tightly related to that optimism about the future potential for the business climate in this area. So I'd like to leave it with that and thank everyone for their time. And I'd just like to draw everyone's attention on this final slide. We've got the RDI's website published written in at the bottom of this slide. And again, I would encourage everyone to come and look at our BRE publications and stay tuned for the upcoming publication of both the best practices paper and the regional report. So on that, I'll finish up.